Hello from cool and rainy Brooklyn, and welcome to the Crossing Borders podcast, where I interview entrepreneurs doing business across borders and the people who support them, with a focus on people with a connection to Latin America. My guest today is Kevin Valdez, co-founder of GroupRaise. You might have heard my podcast with Kevin's co-founders, Devin Baptiste and Sean Park, and you might want to check them out before listening to this one if you want to learn more about GroupRaise and the GroupRaise backstory. Kevin has a great story himself, and he's literally crossed borders to make it happen. Originally from a small town in Guatemala, Kevin moved to the U.S. with his family when he was in middle school, not speaking a single word of English. He quickly learned English and helped his parents with their family business that they started from scratch, and ended up working his way into university where he met his co-founder Devin. We talk about what he learned coming into the U.S. and now his mission to pass on what he's learned to other people, both at home in Latin America and in his new home in the United States, to people who might be coming here not speaking English or coming to start a business. And we also talk about where GroupRaise is going in the future. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Kevin Valdez. Hey Kevin, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Nate. Super pumped and happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad we could finally do this. Where are you in the world today?
Today I'm in my now new hometown, Houston, Texas. So, just kind of running some of the GroupRaise operations out of Houston, and Houston's been my home for since 2008.
And so, for those who don't know and haven't listened to either your co-founders, Devin and Sean's podcast, can you tell me just a little bit what GroupRaise does?
Yeah. So GroupRaise is a simple way for you to dine and at the same time raise money for things you really care about. So the whole idea is that we want to empower individuals to have a meal at their favorite restaurant, and a portion of that meal be donated, of the ticket you spend on that meal, be donated to a charity, a school, or a nonprofit. So we essentially built a marketplace where we allow restaurants to make themselves available to the community, and communities and individuals raising money for awesome causes can dine at those restaurants.
Awesome. Yeah. And if you want more in-depth background into how GroupRaise started and what GroupRaise is doing today, check out the episodes with Devin Baptiste, who's the CEO. And then if you're interested in learning more about the Chilean part of the GroupRaise operation, check out Sean Park's episode. We're going to focus more on things that we haven't talked about GroupRaise in the past in this episode. So feel free to go back and check. So how did you end up working with GroupRaise? How did you meet Devin?
Man, that's a question. So, Devin and I met in a risk management class back in college. I think out of the classes that we took at the university, that was one of the most challenging ones. And he and I kind of had a thing for competition, and we used to study together, and we spent a lot of time together, actually. Just studying, participating in class. He and I used to have conversations after class, long walks, and just kind of talk about our entrepreneurial dreams and what we wanted to do with our lives and what are the projects that we're working on. So all of those things kind of eventually led me to kind of, partnering up with Devin and going on this adventure. That's been quite an adventure so far. Yeah.
All of the co-founders from GroupRaise are all remarkable people, and Devin sort of is an especially standout person. How quickly did you know that you wanted to do a business with Devin after meeting him in class?
So Devin's always been a bit of a how would I say, atypical individual for me, at least when I met him, because I always thought that he was a little more older. He portrayed himself much older than his age. And I found that really interesting when I was in class, because not many individuals. The university I went to was tailored towards preparing you for the workforce. If you wanted to work at one of the big four accounting firms in the world, that you could do that. That was the usual kind of path, and that was something that it didn't really resonate with me, right? So I grew up in a family of entrepreneurs, if you will, and so since the early days, I've been involved in sort of my family business and been exposed to business. So I've had like this different kind of rebellious bit of mindset, and I think that Devin also shared that, and so that's the first trait that made us connect, I think, and then he had a lot of things to say, and I was curious, so I was kind of exposing myself to a new world, a new age of building businesses, and how do you build a business in the web, and how do you like conduct business in the age of the internet. So he and I share a lot of similar kind of ideas and sentiments in that regard. So yeah.
And so you talk about being on potentially a different path than a lot of other people at your university. I had that same sort of feeling. I remember sitting in an accounting class my sophomore year and just knowing that this wasn't going to be the path for me. And you talked about having a family business. So can you talk about going maybe back even farther of, when you were young, did you know that you were going to be an entrepreneur or potentially work in your family business, or was that something that came on later?
Yeah. So I'll take you all the way back. So I'm originally from Guatemala. I was born in Guatemala and lived in the countryside. So, think of a typical kind of finca or hacienda in the middle of nowhere and completely isolated. And so, my parents at that time had sort of the vision of bringing my sisters and I to the U.S. just from a perspective of kind of education and finding more opportunities. My dad really loved the education system here in the U.S., and he thought that it was a good opportunity to bring his family here and kind of give us exposure to a different way of doing things, right? So we did that. I left around when I was 13 years old, 12 years old, and I landed here in the States. And my family really, like the more I grow up and the older I get, the more lessons I keep like learning from my parents, like from life to running a business. Just because the way they've done things is, I think their story is actually extremely remarkable. We showed up to the U.S. I think we were living in my aunt's uh, spare one bedroom, and it was five of us, right? So literally came here with nothing, and my grandfather at the time started a business where he would load up. He would travel via. He would just drive trucks down to Guatemala, and he would tell his friends, "Hey, I'm going to Guatemala from Jersey." From New Jersey to Guatemala, I'm driving these trucks, and if you have packages you want to send to your family, pay me a little fee, and I take those packages for you. Right? We're talking, 80s, in the early 90s, and so that was a thing that began, and eventually he got a little more sophisticated with that business, and then instead of just driving down, they found new ways to move the cargo. And eventually the cargo was now, what we have now, that we have a door-to-door service that is, we pick up your package here in the U.S. and deliver your package to the front of the door in your home in a place like Guatemala, right? Which it's crazy. Like, I've seen people like cross rivers and canoes to deliver packages to people's doors. So uh, logistics in a whole nother level, super customized, right? yeah, so that business, my mother showed up here in Texas, and there was no one representing that business or doing that business here who we knew. So my aunt said, "Hey, do you want to do this business in Houston?" And kind of started from there. I was 13, and so I was there. I was there day one. You know, when we had, they were shipping. They were shipping, 1 to 5 packages in a month, and nowadays, like when I go visit them in the warehouse, they have containers going out on a weekly basis, right? So, yeah. So I think like the mindset of building something that you care about or something that you want to do on your own was early on instilled in me, I think, by my family for sure. So
I have so many questions about the journey and what the differences are. So let's just start all the way back. So you talked about growing up sort of in the middle of nowhere in Guatemala. What was it like showing up in Houston or outside of Houston as a 12-year-old after having grown up without the U.S. culture, without the language, and not even being in a big city?
yeah. So I think, look, I'm extremely blessed. I think I am in a place. So like now that I'm here, like I have this kind of perspective on that. I mean, at first it was hard, right? I like I said, I come from a remote place in Guatemala, and I was always a good student. So I was always a really good student in Guatemala. I think like since I was in kindergarten, like if you're like top one in your class, we do the September 15th is our Independence Date, and so you celebrate it every year. And so if you're top of your class, you get to carry the flag down this parade down the town, And so I carry the flag since I was in kindergarten all the way through sixth grade when I left.
Wow.
So I was very fortunate, but just like me, there were other kids around me who were, extremely smart, extremely gifted. And yeah, so I show up to the U.S. and like I don't know the language, so like I remember walking into my counselor's office when I was in middle school, and she said, "What's your level of English?" in Spanish, right? She was like trying to assess my level of English, and she's like, "Do you know?" She's like, "Do you know any English?" And I was like, "No, zero, like zero." And then she said, "Do you know what girl means?" And I was like, "No." And she's like, "Well, you're gonna learn that very fast." So yeah, so like I had this. So now we get into kind of people who made a really big stamp in my life. Um, the first one, I think, when I was here in the U.S. is so memorable. It was my teacher. She was my ESL teacher, um, and she made an assessment. And she said, and one of the assessments they make when they're trying to place where you are in your proficiency is they first do a test of your home language to see how proficient you are in that language, right? So she ran a test and she said, "Hey, you have a really high level of like your Spanish is very well developed. I think that you can pick up English quite well, but you're supposed to be in the 8th grade, but I recommend that you come to the 7th grade instead, so you have a little more time with me, and I can get you ready for high school." And I was like, "Sure." And so I did that. But like she had the vision to say, "Hey, I can help you. I know I'm asking you to give up a year, in terms of how fast you're moving through the educational system, but I can, I'll do my best to put you in a better place, right?" So so I always go back to that, like people that have the ability to like recognize opportunities and like really seize that, So like yeah, and so I had I don't know how the general feeling about the education system in the US is. Like I know what it is like superficially, but to give you an example, I had a dedicated translator following from class to class, translating every lecture that was given to me. Whether it was history, I was way ahead in math actually from my peers. And any other like English courses, I had a dedicated translator through each class. Uh, and I'm talking about a small town in Texas, you know. So uh, I was very lucky, I think, in terms of that. Yeah. I think that when I first came to the U.S., I had this perspective that I was in high school and I would look at my peers, other high school students, and I would early on I would kind of be a bit, I would judge them a bit in terms of I would look at them and then they would remind me of my peers back in Guatemala, right? And I would always think like, man, I would do anything to like take the chance that you have here and give it to one of my like friends back in Guatemala. Like I know like, 10, 20 kids that would do anything to be in your shoes, uh, to have this chance that you're just kind of like slacking or not doing anything, right? So I had like this big presence of that for a very long time when I first came here. When I saw kids that weren't really, I felt was, not taking an opportunity, but like it was by no fault of their own, just because I had a different perspective, right? So I had a different perspective on certain things that they just had no exposure to.
So, talking about that different perspective, what would you say even today? How is that different perspective of growing up in a small town until you were 12 and then coming to the US? How did that affect you?
Yeah, so I think in a big way, I think that sticks with me still today. Is definitely part of kind of like what some of the things that shaped me. I had another big impression. I think college. We had the president of Mexico, Vicente Fox, come to the university, and he sat down with like about 20 of us, and he was like, "Hey guys, I just want to tell you that those of you, who have kind of Latino roots and have like a massive responsibility. For every one of you, there's 20 kids out there that would do anything to be in your position, and it is your responsibility to empower those individuals and help them, right?" And so those two things kind of just stuck with me throughout, and that's part of the GroupRaise mission is really to help individuals raise awareness about the causes they care about and support the causes they care about. And so I was really in this place where I wanted to be working in something that had a meaningful purpose, but also a big impact, right? So yeah, I think that those two principles really aligned whenever Devin and I started like tinkering around with the GroupRaise idea, and uh, yeah, so it's huge. I mean, yeah, it's what I find is that is more unique as I get older. I learn to appreciate it a little more every day. When before you may think of it as a disadvantage, or you're a little weird, or something different. You're different than other people, or you think a little different. I'm learning to appreciate that as an asset, right?
So, you talk about responsibility. What kind of responsibility in day to day do you see in the GroupRaise business to kind of give back?
Yeah. So, I mean, it changes, right? So it's changing. It's always changing in the sense that where we place the emphasis and where I personally place my emphasis, right? So I think in the early stages of the business, um, uh, and this goes back to like a lesson that my mom taught me, right? So like if I go back to seeing my parents how they built their business, um, they were like customer service centric is their entire, like if you ask them for one key lesson that you can walk away and build a successful business, is just being super customer centric, focused. And so they built that into how they built their business, and I saw the power of like compound of that, right? So like they would start with one or three, four packages, and And those people would refer the next person, and they would answer the phone if it was 9 p.m. or 11 p.m. Somebody wanted to send a shipment, they would, like, if a call was missed, they'll return every missed call, and so, like, having that, like, almost obsessive sense of like being, customer centric was really big for them. And so we've sort of, we've tried to I've tried to take that into my practice and how we run a GroupRaise, right? So early on, I was the one on the phone talking to customers about, like, how we can, increase their sales, talking to restaurants about how we can bring people into their restaurant. And so when they trust you, right, to do something like that for them, yeah, we take that responsibility very serious. And and it doesn't matter if you're a mom and pop shop or if you're an IHOP or an Outback Steakhouse, right? So it's all those customers. Yeah, we try to keep a really high emphasis on taking care of them.
So you mentioned other lessons that your parents had taught you in the past, not necessarily about business, but just about life. Can you talk about a couple of them that you think are particularly important?
Yeah, I mean, I think my dad was big on. He always had this phrase that he was like, "Hey, I want you to, like, be whatever you're working on, always working on. Be passionate about it, but don't waste any time, right? Because time is so precious." So he didn't say it in an academic way of, like, time value, like the most expensive currency you have is time, but he did have that fundamental understanding of how precious time is, and so that's something that he's engraved into um, my sisters, myself, really, and he's always been very disciplined about doing things right. That's kind of his some of his the way he sort of lived his business life, if you will, and personal life as well. So he always wanted to make sure. I mean, it goes all the way back to, he had the vision of bringing his family to the U.S. and giving them an opportunity. So it's all about seizing that opportunity, right? So even today, when my sisters are in college, one of them is they're both in university now. And it's all about seizing that opportunity, right? So we're on like this we're on like this mission to seize the opportunity in front of us, right? And it's like it's just engraved. It's just like a fact of life that every day you wake up and you go out and seize the opportunity, because you have no time to waste, right? So, like, it sounds kind of corny, but like, when I see other kind of because I've always been in this mindset. Uh, um, when that's not the case around me, when I see around and I find out that that's not usually the case, it's just a little interesting to see.
Yeah, that's a really important lesson too. I mean, especially when you're thinking about a startup. I mean, the only advantage you have is time and speed, right? So it's pretty amazing that you've been kind of given that lesson ever since you were really young. I'm sure it helps a lot daily.
Yeah, I mean, and time, like, kind of bends nowadays. Like, I like thank God it's Monday, like, oh God, it's already Friday. Like I dread Fridays and I love Mondays, like, in the sense that, like, um there's there's just so much to do, especially when you're starting the business. And, like, when you're early on, when you're, like, in the product market fit and you're trying to, like, find your first early customers, um you're working day and night to find, like, in that category of work, right? So it's a lot of grunt work. It's a lot of, like, kind of, like, on your keyboard, typing away, whether it's emails and trying to talk to your customers. And as you get later into the stages of your business, um, it's more about spending time thinking about, how do you make the people around you more efficient? How do you make the people around you successful? If they depend on you for their success, in terms of giving them guiding principles so that they can execute their work. So you spend a lot of time doing that, and that's precious because if you're not being effective, that multiplies times however many people are working under you, right? So then you really start thinking like, man. So like when you take a meeting, and like in the meeting, there's 6 or 7 people in a meeting, you think, okay, is this the most effective use of everybody's time, right? So that really multiplies.
So I remember talking with you and some of the other entrepreneurs that are in the Magma portfolio about um, some of the disadvantages of, or some of the challenges of um, being a completely sort of self-made entrepreneur, and flipping that mindset from potentially, I can do all of this and I'm going to spend my time to save the money, versus once you have a business that's already successful, kind of flipping the script and thinking about, I should be outsourcing this, or I should be hiring someone to do this. Can you talk a little bit about how you've gone through that challenge over the last few years, or seen other entrepreneurs go through that challenge as your business has become more successful?
Yeah. So early on, you want to do everything yourself, and so like if I can save $100 here, I'm gonna go and put the extra work to do that. If I can save $1,000 here, I'm gonna go and do that extra work, right? Um, and and the person who actually like really shifted my perspective on that was my brother-in-law, Nathan Yap. Nathan, he's around my age. He's launched by this point 7 to 10 businesses, um, and he's like a solo entrepreneur. But early on, he had this mindset of like investing, whether it was in education or investing in speed, right? So like he would just, if a program cost him, if a program that helped him better manage his time cost him, $10,000, he'll put that down and go do the program because he knew that the ROI on that was going to be greater, right? And when I looked at that early on, I was like, what the hell are you doing? Like $10,000 for somebody to tell you how to manage your day? Like how is that even worth it? Um, uh, and so like now I see the advantages of that because those things compound, right? So whether it is kind of either if it's outsourcing the work, or if it's kind of even in the early days of hiring, right? So like I can continue to do this. I remember clearly when I made one of my first hires. At this point, we were beginning to do some of the restaurant sales. And I was replying to all these emails, right? I was spending like 4 hours a day, 3 hours a day, just replying to emails. And the moment we hired somebody to kind of take over that responsibility, like my day and my year, and it all kind of changed just because like I was like, oh my God, now I have like all this time to actually work on the things I've been thinking about in the back of my head. So super valuable. I think like it's hard to at first justify the cost, but I think that once you do it once and really see that the benefit of uh, you being free to actually work on the business, it speeds everything up, right? So like now I try to delegate as much as I can, right? So like I try to get out of people's way and in that sense.
So I want to jump back to your story. I think we picked up, or we left off right when you were having your classes translated for you, and you had a teacher who sort of picked you out and said, I'm going to help you. Now you speak perfect English. You ended up at a university. What happened in the meantime? How did you get to that class with Devin?
In the meantime, the reason I went to the university I went to, uh, it was because I was a soccer player. So I was a soccer player all of my life, and I love the game. Like I'm the biggest soccer fan, and Champions League is about to come on at 2:30 today, my time. Uh,
We'll be done by then. Don't worry.
And so that was the initial reason. So I was a soccer player in high school. Like I was not always idealistic. So like I went through this point where halfway through my high school, I learned English. I was talking to, making friends, and like learning to talk to girls, and so like I kind of forgot all these like all these perspectives that I initially came with, because I was surrounded by just, I mean, I went to a small town high school in Texas. And so I just kind of became a high schooler, right? I kind of became a high schooler, and um, I was super active in sports. I was in the track team, and I was the only like Latino guy in a track team. My entire track team was like super fast black dudes, and I was like the only odd Latino guy. Everybody thought I was a white guy, and it was just interesting. Um, and so, uh, yeah, I think that it was towards my family business had a lot to do with um, the entrepreneurial side of me, because I was there like year one, right, for my family business. And so for them, actually, before coming to GroupRaise, that was my full time job. And so I helped them. And the story about like um, Hispanic or Latino kids growing up with non English speaking parents in the U.S., like you learn a lot of things very early on, because you have to translate all these things for your parents, right? So my parents were working around conducting business, not speaking the language, so I had to like go get permits. I had to go file for. I remember I went to at that time Barnes and Noble, uh, and I picked up the book How to Start a Business for Dummies. And so like I read that book. I read the book, and like there was a part of it where it said, well, you need to file for an incorporation. You need to incorporate your business. And then I was like, okay. And then I think I searched how to incorporate your business in Texas. I found the forms, I filled out the forms, and I sent them. So I incorporated the whole thing. I think it was $650 that I paid. Um, but it was all sort of like self taught, right? So um, and
How old?
yeah,
How
and
old
so
would
that
you have been when you did that, more or less?
probably 15 or 16. I think that's what I was doing. Yeah.
That's
And
awesome.
so, yeah, it was great. Like, it was like how to start a business for dummies. One of those how to for dummies books. I think I have it somewhere still. And yeah, so then I was always involved in the business. I helped my parents kind of build their first CRM system. I met. So I was like, okay, we need to. I think this was later on. I was probably past high school. I was first year of college, probably. I know they needed a CRM system to be more efficient, and I didn't know how to. I didn't think people would understand what I wanted, so I went online and I found a Guatemalan developer at the time, who I just emailed and I was like, hey, I'm looking for a CRM system that needs to do X, Y, and Z. Uh, can you help me build that? And then the guy, of course, said, yeah, let's do it. And so he and I started like we would meet 3 times a week, and he was like putting together the CRM system, and I would give him feedback, and I was like, I need invoice numbers, I need fields for my customers' names and addresses, and so we eventually got to a place where a year went by and we couldn't get anything done. So like we couldn't finish the project, and um, yeah, but I after that I then hired somebody uh, local who was from Venezuela actually. He's still today the systems admin for the business. He's a Venezuelan guy. He's maybe like in his late 40s, uh, and I didn't know anything about code or anything like that, but I knew what I wanted. So I told him, I was like, listen, like this is what I'm looking for. Nobody's been able to build it for me. If you build it, I'm gonna take you out to lunch. And he said, all right, let's do it. And so going back and forth with them, kind of building the CRM system, and now it's like this sophisticated like scanning plus warehouse management plus route management plus yeah, it's gotten kind of crazy. So that always kept me. I guess I was destined in a way to be in a world where I needed to either have my own business, run my own business, just because of this, constant exposure to doing these things. And I love solving those problems, right? So like, I loved solving the problems for my family business. Like I was like, okay, where's the inefficiency? How can I make that better? And I was always looking for problems, to solve. Um, so yeah.
So, how often do you get back to Guatemala, either just to visit or with the family business?
Maybe twice or three times a year now. More now than before. So I'm married now. That I took my wife out there first couple of times, so she can check out like who she was really marrying. I was like, hey, just by the way, this is where I'm really from. So before you want to take the job, just be sure what you're getting. Make sure you know what you're getting into. Um, yeah, so I go now and then to Guatemala. But like I said, I'm from like very remote place, so I never got the opportunity to build really strong relationships in the city, right? Or with other entrepreneurs like myself, or like I try to look for people that are from Guatemala that look like me, and it's really hard for me to find them, right? So lately, I've been on a hunt for them.
Well, hopefully this podcast helps us find some more.
Yeah,
So
I would love to.
So when you go back to Guatemala, I don't think most of the people that listen to this have probably been, or has, if they have, maybe not spent much time. So can you talk a little bit about what it's like going back, and the area where you grew up in, and then also spending more time in cities? Kind of what's it like?
What's it like? So my other reference for Guatemala is geographically like a beautiful country, right? So it's like a ever spring country, so it's always like a beautiful scenery. I come from a very small town. We're talking about where everybody knows their name, and everybody knows who your dad is and who your grandpa was and who your great grandpa was. And so that's where I come from, in the sense that uh, like I have my great great grandfather's statue in the middle of the town because he was one of the founders of the town. The town is still very small, right? But the city is the city is considered the largest, both economically and in terms of size, in Central America, right? So there's a lot of opportunity in Guatemala, and I see a lot of people. I've met a lot of people from either South America or other countries in Central America, going to Guatemala for the business opportunities that it presents, just because it's a larger metropolitan. It's like the largest metropolitan city in that area of the world. The little strip of land between Panama and Guatemala, essentially. So lots of tourism. So we have beautiful places like Antigua, Guatemala, which is like what everybody knows Guatemala for, which is a colonial city. Has been named one of the preserved kind of colonial cities of humanity from the early times of colonization. And we have beautiful places like a fun fact about Guatemala, 60% of the population is still considered to be from the Mayan descent, right? So we have a extremely large population of indigenous Mayan population who kind of dominate the demographic in the country. So yeah, I'm just kind of learning about that because I'm learning about those dynamics of the population and the relationship, and how that the country's evolved, right, from an outside perspective. And it's just really interesting to see those dynamics of those demographics kind of live together.
So you talked a little bit before about sort of the responsibility of that when Vicente Fox and also your parents talked about it. What kind of responsibility do you see as being from Guatemala and now having had this opportunity and building a business in the US to help in Guatemala or provide opportunities? What do you think? What's your thinking on that?
Yeah, so a lot of so I first started with like I need to go back and help somebody in my town, right, in my hometown. My mentality was always that I wanted to get somewhere where I can be in a place where I can either provide jobs or an opportunity to people in my hometown. And then I thought, well, why not we just do the country, right? Why don't we impact the country? And then I thought, well, let's do the region. And now my thinking's led me to why don't we just find an opportunity to really impact all of Latin America, right? And the impact is, at face value, it's about giving. So I'm very blessed and lucky because I was a 12-year-old who got given a chance early on. Had it not been for that, I think you and I wouldn't be speaking right now, nowhere near. And so when I think about given an opportunity, I think about my classmates, right? So I think of, 3, 5, 10 classmates who were even more qualified than I was. And giving those people a chance, because when I go back and I see them today, their lives, like, I'm from a different planet, I'm from a different planet completely, in the sense that, like, the things I've been exposed to, the things I've learned, I've been blessed in terms of having an opportunity to just build a lot of perspective in both traveling the world and just living in different places. And so I think that at the base level, there's not much difference between myself and the kid sitting next to me in class in fifth grade, right? When I was in Guatemala, it's just that I was given an opportunity and a chance. So I feel like part of my life's mission really is to give those 12, 13-year-olds a chance and an opportunity to really, like, change completely how their lives will play out. And I see that from my classmates, and it's not a problem only to Guatemala, right? It's a lack of opportunity in those spaces is throughout, right, throughout Latin America. So the thing I think about is all the potential that's there that is untapped, right? So that's just waiting for a little chance. And so I am, a mild version of what can happen when you give somebody a chance. But there are many more people there who will do extraordinary things if they have that opportunity, right? So, and it wasn't more present until now, through the internet, right? So I think the web democratizes education. I think it gives us an opportunity to, like, level the playing field in terms of access. Information is available, rather accessible. So I think those tools need to be utilized through the region to, like, give people some light of hope.
So if you had an ask of either people listening or a dream of something that could be created that would help kids that were still in your town or other people all across the region, what do you think that potentially looks like?
So I think that so I'll tell you what, like, I've struggled with recently, like I said, I've been on the hunt for these people, either individuals making an impact locally, organizations. There are so many organizations making an impact in these areas. But I have a hard time finding a centralized place that can facilitate where I can help, right? So I think whether it's a curated space for, hey, I want to help, where should I put my efforts towards? Because there are so many great causes in these areas, right? And so many great people doing amazing work. But, like, I'm pretty savvy on the internet, so, like, I should be able to find these people rather easy. And it's still a tough thing for me to do. So I just think, like, I think kind of organizing how I don't think that we need to reinvent a lot of things. So this is the other thing. Like, I think that everybody's trying to tackle, like, a different issue. And so there are a lot of people putting a ton of work into different causes. But maybe kind of choose individual causes that we can put a group effort into. I think that could be a way to start, picking out problems or finding ways to give chances to other kids, right? So
what advice would you give to yourself at 12, knowing what you know today, or potentially to the other kids that are, say, 12 in Guatemala or other places in Latin America, after seeing your path and what you know today?
It's a good question. So it's both, right? It's a bit of a loaded question in the sense that I think you have to give yourself authority to like really stand up for what you represent and like really be yourself, right? Uh, because I think the culture in which I was kind of brought up early on is um, a culture where like the authority is given to you to like enable you to do certain things. And maybe that's not just a Guatemalan thing, but it's more like as a more broad global thing where you have to give yourself permission, if you will, to like go on and be successful and want to do things, right? Um, and so I just feel like when I go back to Guatemala, I interact with my my peers or my ex classmates who are now live in a different place. I feel like the culture there is much different. Like the culture isn't one where in places I found sometimes that it's not like there's not much encouragement for you to like go and be successful, right? So like it feels like you always have to like get permission to go and be successful. And so um, I don't know how you tell it to a 12-year-old. Nowadays, my hope is that like everybody has a mobile phone in Guatemala. So uh, I think like giving them exposure to information in that way is a much presents another set of challenges, if you will.
How about advice to other immigrants that are coming to the US that maybe don't speak the language at all or not fully when they're first arriving and are getting just dropped into a new culture and a new school? What advice would you give to yourself, knowing what you know today, to say your 14 or 15-year-old self in school?
Yeah, I think like so from a different perspective, it would be this like I am extremely bullish about the U.S. like in terms of what the U.S. represents and stands for, right? So I think like recently we're in like a political climate that's uh, I think that doesn't really represent the values of the U.S. because I am extremely bullish for it. I think like it still represents a place where you can come and create and do um, what you set your mind to, and the real thing that places a limit on you is yourself, right? So again, that sounds a bit of like a cliche, but it's been so real for me. Like I've seen it firsthand, right? So I've seen my parents come out here and just work really hard and build a business and put their family in a good place, and that's an inspiring story, right? And I still think that those values are the real values of kind of what the U.S. stands for, and so um, yeah, I'm extremely thankful and in love with this country as well. So um, I think for a 15-year-old who's coming um, into the U.S. into a place where you don't know the language and you don't know the people. I mean, it's just tough. It's a tough gig. I think I was just lucky.
So, what books, blogs, podcasts, documentaries, any sort of media um, can you recommend to either other entrepreneurs or potentially people listening to this podcast that have helped you out, either in business or just in life?
So when we started GroupRaise, I was reading a lot of Guy Kawasaki. Do you remember? He
Mm-hmm.
was the one of the evangelists for Apple early on. He had this book, the what was it, The Power of Enchantment. Uh, that was really foundational in terms of like building beautiful experiences, and kind of like thinking through the experience of delighting and enchanting your customers and your users. I think that was very powerful early on. How we thought about anywhere from from customer service and support to how you think about your business in general. Um, that one was really, really, really big for me, and I subscribe to. So, like, I don't know if you know the story that you know the story very well of GroupRaise doing a lot of the outsourcing and how we essentially ended up building like a 50-person team in the Philippines that continues to grow. Uh, and so that idea initially, uh, it actually first kind of came out of the Tim Ferriss book, The 5 Hour Work Week, if you remember, that 5 Hour Work Week had a section for like outsourcing, and in that section there was a list of companies that you could like uh, solicit to like get, to help you do some outsourcing. And so I actually reached out to those, the ones in the book, and I got some uh, response. So like that was big for me. I think like just kind of learning about delegation and training and outsourcing. Like GroupRaise has been since day one a kind of remote company for us. I remember that I used to um, meet with Devin like twice a week when he was in Taiwan and I was in the US. And then we would meet for like an hour and talk about our progress for the week when we first started off. So I think that was big. So I actually subscribe to a ton of Tim Ferriss. There's this place where I go to get more learning from is Stanford Corner. Is it Stanford ecorner.edu? I think it's the URL where that's where I first kind of discovered Steve Blank, and I discover a lot of these kind of mentors in the space that talked about kind of building your business, and that had a big influence in me. So a ton of podcasts that I listen to. I've actually have been listening to a ton of your podcasts that I find inspiring because it gives me a perspective into Latin America, and I think that it's amazing the work you're doing in that area because there's so much potential there that the story just needs to be told. So,
thanks. Yeah, I'm just happy to be able to tell the stories. I think they're all stories that need to be told. So you also had an interesting experience because you have a Latin America team based in Chile, and you're from Latin America originally, but we're in the US, and you only recently went down to actually check out the office in Chile within the last year or so. So can you talk a little bit about what that was like? One, just having the team, the second office in Chile, and then two, what it was like going down to Chile and sort of getting to know another country?
Yeah, so the Chilean experience was really cool. Like when Devin was like, "Hey, I'm going down to Chile, taking my family, my baby. We're getting out of here. There's a chance for us out there." And I was like, "Okay, that sounds kind of crazy, but I'll just do my thing here in Houston. I'll hold it down in the Houston office, and you can go and work from there." And so I kept hearing Devin was like, "You have to come down. You have to come down. It's crazy out here. Like, it's nothing like you'd imagine, right?" And so I show up to Santiago, and it's like, and like I was like in awe, and like in the sense that it's nothing like my experience back in Guatemala, and it's still, and I think it's nothing like my experience here in Houston. And like the city in itself, it's like from its transportation systems to actually they have good food that is like non-Chilean food. Please, my Chilean friends. So I think the food is great. I think like the transportation is amazing. Like I think the scenery and the lifestyle you live there is crazy. And like my first thing was like, what kind of world is this? Like I saw people that look like me functioning at a super high level in a super sophisticated like society, and I was just like, what is happening? So I had like a minor kind of like mind bending experience when I first went to see Santiago, right? So, never seen something like that before. So, I think working with them is it's like for GroupRaise has been kind of our nature, so it fits very natural in terms of having people distributed across the globe. So, one of the biggest advantages, like I said, like Devin and I used to meet probably like at 10 p.m. when he was in Taiwan, my time, and some awkward times, and working with my people in Chile because I actually part of the sales team that I run is in Chile. So my account managers are in Chile, and they're like the day-to-day support for the kind of our enterprise customers, and like our enterprise customers have no clue that that's where they are, and they're funny. They're both American and they're both from Houston. So we found one of them we recruited out of the University of Houston, and she wanted to learn Spanish and travel. And so we're like, hey, you can learn Spanish and travel and work for us down in Chile. And she was like, done deal. And the other one we recently hired, she's from Houston, was completely unrelated in Chile, in Santiago. And then she came out looking for a job when we put out a job posting. So, so we talk, every day. We have our kind of Monday stand-ups. We have our Thursday stand-ups, and things just work really smooth for us. I think, again, like, we've been a kind of remote company for a very long time. So, like, even having the same team in different division, like the same division of a company in two different geographical areas, actually, we just hire somebody in the Philippines who is the assistant to my account executives. So, so like, now we have like the sales team being supported from Houston, Chile, and Philippines. So it's it's been a fun thing for us.
That's awesome. So, what's next for you and for GroupRaise in 2018?
Oh, GroupRaise. So we have this crazy vision of continuing to grow our presence. We're coming close to the 10,000 mark restaurant. So we have about, close to 10,000 restaurants on the platform now. And we really think that we want to get to a place where 25,000 restaurants is our next mark. And alongside, though, like, more important, I think, what we want to do with restaurants and our customers is continue to like provide them value and make them more valuable over time, right? So today we offer, kind of like the fundraising or booking experience for restaurants, and our mission is to like make that successful. So have several bookings for our customers, and in the future we see a place where we can begin to offer kind of different offerings for our customers, where we make that relationship kind of deeper and we make them more valuable over a period of time. So there's a world in which we have about above 100,000 restaurants on the platform, and we're enabling people to do $1 million in donations for dining with our restaurants. So, I mean, it's like, to say that out loud right now, it just sounds kind of crazy, but like, from the experience that I've had coming to where we are today, is like, yeah, if you told me one day that we'll have close to 10,000 restaurants on the platform, like, I would tell you you're crazy. Like, there's no way. And so, we have some big goals and ambition for this year and 2019 already. We're thinking about 2019, still planning.
Well, I'm excited to see you guys attack the goals, and I'm sure you're going to hit them. So I'm really happy you were able to take the time to do the podcast, and thanks again for doing it.
Thank you, Nate. I appreciate the time, and yeah, this is super fun. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Crossing Borders with my guest, Kevin Valdez. If you liked it, please reach out on Twitter or LinkedIn and let us know, or leave a review on iTunes or Stitcher. We'd really appreciate it. Have a good rest of your day, and I hope you enjoyed this podcast.